Hi, boys and girls. Thanks for joining me for another story from Pastor Joe. I'm going to tell you an old favorite of mine, one that I learned, let's see, probably almost 50 years ago when I began to work at summer camp. And this was a story that we enjoyed telling campers about. Now, it's probably not a true story, but it is a story that was passed down from generation to generation about a certain event that took place with a certain American Indian tribe. I don't know what tribe it was. It's not important, but this was a tribe of Indians that lived in villages, and there was this one village I want to tell you about. And some of you may have heard me tell this story, but I think it's been years since I've told this story to anyone. So I want to tell it again, all right? So here's how it goes. There was this village that was occupied by these Native American Indians, and they had a chief who was in charge of the village, and he was getting pretty old. And I love telling these stories about chiefs who were getting pretty old because they needed to choose someone to follow them, someone who would become the chief after they were too old to lead the people, right? And so this was what was happening. And very often, as the stories go, the chief would choose his successor, that's who the next person would be to take his position. He would choose that person by having a contest. And that's how this story goes. The chief had decided he would have a contest. Now, just to be fair, the chief knew all of the I should say the Indian braves, the braves in this tribe. He knew them well. He had led them and watched over, made decisions about their families to help their families out, and decisions that the entire tribe would follow. And so he knew what was going on in the lives of each of these Indian braves. And but still, he was going to have a contest to test how strong these braves were. He wanted to see how wise they were, how smart they were, how loyal they were, how physically strong they were. But he just wanted to make sure that he chose just the right man to follow in his footsteps, right? To lead the people fairly and wisely and to be a strong leader, okay? So he had a contest to find this out. And here's what he decided to do. He called all of the village people together. And he called them down to meet down by the edge of the water. This village was right on the edge of a lake. There was a big, big lake. And the village was right there off the shore. And everybody came down by the water's edge. And they had this big fire pit there, because it got very cold at times. They didn't have heating like we have in this room and in your house and at the school, where you go. They didn't have that. They just had to keep warm one way or another. And so they had this big fire pit, and very often there was fire burning all the time in there. So people could come there and they could get warm if it was cold, okay? And so it was burning, and all of the village came down because the chief had said, I want to see everyone here. I want to tell them something. And so everyone came. And then he explained to them that he was getting old. The time was coming near when he was going to need to stop being their chief. He was just an old man and he needed to retire. Sort of like Pastor Joe is about to retire, right? And maybe someone else will come and they'll be younger and they'll have more energy than Pastor Joe and things like that, and be able to help the church, right? And this is what the chief was doing. He was going to help them have a new leader who would be strong, but they had to have a contest. So he explained to them what the contest would be. And he said to them, what I'm going to do is we're going to have a number of different competitions, physical challenges and challenges, contests that tested their thinking ability, their reasoning ability and decision making and all of these things to try to find just the best brave that could become the chief. And of course, many of the braves had hoped that they would be the new chief of the village because they had so much to give and to be in charge of. And of course, it was kind of fun to be in charge of everything, right? And so they started having all of these competitions. And the winners of that competition, they would write it down somehow. Okay, we know who won that one. And now they had this competition. We know who won this one. We know who won this one. And they had all of these competitions, and they took the leaders of all of those, and then they had them go through certain kinds of tests or contests, right? And they came down to where there were two young men who were at the top. They had won all of their competitions, and now it was just down to two men who would be having a contest to see which one of them would finally be the new chief of this tribe. And the chief finally got all the village together for an announcement as to what the final contest was going to be. And here's what he said to them as they all stood as close to the fire as they could get, because it was kind of cold, and it was getting near the end of the day where the sun was down, and now there was some light in the sky, but not much. And as the darkness was coming upon them, they stood there, and it wasn't totally dark yet, but the chief spoke to the village and said, here is what the final competition is going to be between these two young braves. And by the way, congratulations that you have made it this far. And then he explained to them, he turned around and he pointed at this big lake that they stood at the edge of. And he said, we are going to have a race around the lake. And both of you young men are going to race each other to go all the way around this lake, all the way to the other side, and then all the way back here. And here's what you have to do. You have to leave first thing in the morning, and I'll tell you when. We'll all come back here first thing tomorrow morning before the sun even comes up. And we're going to all gather here around this fire. And then we're going to send you on your way, and you have to get all the way around the lake and get back here and be the first one back, but you have to make it before the sun goes down at the end of the day. Well, this was a very large lake, and it would take a long day. It would take all day long to get around that lake, all the way around the lake, and get back in time for the sun to go down. And they had to get there before the sun went down, otherwise they'd be disqualified. That means they were out of the contest, and the other person, if they made it, they would win. Okay? So that was going to be the contest that they would have. However, there was another part of the contest that the chief didn't tell them about. He said, I will tell you one more thing when you come tomorrow morning and when you are ready to start the race. Oh, that was interesting, wasn't it? So they all left, and the fire was burning down a little bit, and it was kind of dying out because they were all going back to their huts or their teepees or wherever they were staying in their village. And early in the morning, before the sun came up, the village came back out. And the chief wasn't there yet, but he would be. And they all came, and they waited, and the sun hadn't come up yet. And then the chief came out. And there were the two braves standing there waiting, and they were close to the fire, the center of where the chief was going to speak, and all the people watched. The chief came out, and you know how, have you seen pictures of Indian chiefs? And they've got their arms crossed like that, and he walked, and he had that big, what do you call that thing, a wigwam or anything, that big with the feathers in it and the hat. Anyway, so he had that on, and he came there for the official beginning of the final contest. And the young braves said to the chief, there was something more that you wanted us to do? There was something more you wanted to tell us about this race before we begin? He said, yes, and it's time for me to tell you. Not only will you have to race all the way around the lake, but you will also, and of course, get back here before the sun goes down. But you will also have to do this. And he pointed to each one of their hips. Each one of the braves had something tied around their waist. And it was interesting. I wish I had something I could show you here. I don't. But it was like they had a cloth, and it was like this size, maybe twice, maybe it was square, maybe two of these together, and it was square like that. And it was an animal skin, so it was pretty tough, but they used it this way. They would put things in it, and then they would take this corner and this corner, they'd pull them together, and then this corner, and they'd pull it together, and then they'd take the final corner and bring here. Now they had a bag, right? A pouch, we would call it, a pouch. And at the top, you can't do that with this paper, I should have planned better, but at the top they would pull them all together and then put them right around their little belt, whatever their belt was, and they would hold it there, and whatever was in it, they could just walk, and that would be their side pouch, like what we would call a fanny pack, right? But it was just a pouch like this, and it was a very thick skin, so it could hold things that, whether they were cold or hot. Now, it wasn't something you could put liquid in, water or something, because it wasn't like a real pouch. It wasn't like a thermos. But anyway, you could put things in it. And he said, I want you each to take your pouch out, and I want you to lay it next to our big fire. And then I want you to take a stick, and I want you to go a little ways into the fire and scrape out some of the hot coals that are very low inside the fire. Have you ever seen those? Yeah, the really hot glowing coals. Make sure they're the hot ones, the chief said, and scoop them out onto your flat pouches. And so they did that, and they scooped them out. And then he said, now gather the corners and make the pouches and tie them to your belt. And they did that. And so they thought, okay, I have some hot coals in my pocket, right? In my pouch. And the chief then told them what they were beginning to figure out. He said, not only do you need to go all the way around this lake and get back here before the sun goes out, but those coals must still be warm enough for you to open them up and scrape them out onto the ground and add some twigs to them and make a fire. So they're going to still have to be hot enough when you get back to make a fire. Whoa, I don't know. I don't know if I could. I know I couldn't do that. To get here all the way back in time for those coals not to have gotten cold. Well, that was really going to spice up this contest, don't you think? So the time came, and the chief had finished telling them all of the rules, and both of the braves knew that they'd better really go fast and get back here really fast. And so they watched, because the chief had told them, once the sun peaks up over that mountain over there and you see it, then I will say it's time to go. And so when the sun starts and when the sun stops, that's when that's what, the time that the contest would be. And so they all waited. And they waited, and the crowd watched and watched and watched, and each of the braves were watching, and the chief was watching, and finally the sun showed up. And right then the chief said, go! And they took off, they went that way, and they ran and ran and ran. Now, different people run different ways. Some people like to run fast. When they take off, they like to take off fast. Some horses are that way too. They run really fast from the get-go, right from the start. And other horses and other people run slowly. They pace themselves. So the ones that run fast, well, they're going to get tired, and they know they will. So they run really, really, really fast, and then they stop because they ran so much faster than everyone else. They stop and they rest, and then they take off again. And so they like to run fast all the time. And then the others, and that was one of the braves. He was that way. He would sprint. He would take off really fast. And then he would rest, and then he would run, and then he'd rest, and he'd run. The other one liked to pace himself. In other words, he didn't run really fast, but he wouldn't have to stop and rest because he wouldn't get as tired. So he would just keep going. Sort of like if you've heard the story of the tortoise and the hare, you could ask your mom or dad to tell you that story, but it's sort of like that, where one went fast and one went slow. But the tortoise went so slow, but he didn't have to stop to rest. So they kind of, which one would win, right? And so that's what was happening. The first brave took off. And here he got a lot of distance between himself and the second brave, who was just pacing himself, trying to go as quickly as he could, but not trying to wear himself out and tire himself. And off they went, and they climbed over the tree stumps or the fallen trees that fell over into the water, and now they had to climb over them. And they'd go around these big outcropping of boulders and rocks that were in their way right up at the edge of the shoreline. And they'd go this way and go that way, and they'd follow. And many of them, they had gone this way. Many of the braves in the village had gone around the lake many times in their lives. This was their lake, you could say. And so they knew the way, but they knew they had to go fast because they knew how far it was. And so off went the first one, and he went, and he went, and he went, and he went, and he got about halfway around the lake, straight across the lake from where they had started. And as he approached that halfway point, he noticed something up ahead. He was watching as he was running for all he was worth, and he was watching, and he saw what looked like a person. Yes, it was a person. It was an old man, and the old man had a cane, and he had a big fur over him, like a coat, and he looked tired. And the old man turned as the young brave was running toward him, and he turned and he started waving at the young brave, and he said, "Oh, young man, please stop, please help me. And the young brave, who was tired, so he stopped just briefly, but he was in a race, he couldn't waste much time. He said, "Yes, old man, what is wrong?" And the old man said, "Oh, I have been on a journey, and I am very, very tired and very weak. I won't be able to continue my journey and make it back to my village unless I eat something. I'm resting, but I still need nourishment. I need strength, and I'll only have that if I can eat some food. But I have no food, and I'm too old to be able to catch any fish or hunt any animal. I am just too old. So would you be willing to feed me? Could you make me some fish? Maybe catch some fish and make them for me." And the young brave said, "Old man, I have been taught to respect my elders, and I certainly would do that for you if I had the time. But I'm in a race, you see, and the first one of us two braves who makes it back in time before the sun goes down is going to be the new chief of the village. And I promise you," he said, "that I will send back, once I get there and I become the new chief, I will send back more braves to come and help you. How's that?" And the old man said, "That will take you forever, just for you to get there and to come back, and I'm starving and I'm weak. I don't think I can last that long." And the young brave had to make a decision. Do I stop and help this old man and give up my chances at being the new chief of my village that I love very much? Do I do that? Or do I say, "I'm sorry, old man, I will send you help as soon as I can and go on to become the new chief of my village," which is very important. Which one should I do? Which decision should I make? And he finally made a decision, and he said to the old man, "Old man, I will send you help, but I'm so sorry, but I cannot stay here and help you right now." And off he went, and the old man said, "Please stop, please come back." And the brave was gone. He had left, thinking that he was doing the right thing, but wishing he could help, but he couldn't, because he thought it was more important to get back and become the new chief of his village. Off he went. Well, of course, he was sprinting, and so he was a little ways away, ahead of the second brave, and so up came the second brave. And the old man turned and saw him coming. And he said, oh, young man, please stop, please stop. Well, the second brave had been trying all this time to catch up with the first brave. And it was a little discouraging because he had not yet caught up with the first brave who was ahead of him. And he wondered if he would even win this race. He was trying to do it by his own style of not resting very much and just keeping a good pace. And he thought that eventually he would catch up with the faster brave, but he hadn't reached him yet. And now this old man was calling him to stop. And so he finally did stop. He did need a bit of a rest. And he said to the old man, What is it, old man? How can I help you? And the old man said, and he explained to him everything that he had told the first brave. I need help. I'm too weak to catch any food, and I must get more nourishment, and then I'll be strong enough to make it back to my village. And could you please help me? Now the second brave had a decision to make. Should he try to keep his pace and try to eventually catch up with and then pass the first brave? Or maybe he had lost the race anyway. Should he stop and help his elder? Because all the braves had been taught to respect and to help those who are older than they are. And it was very important. And he thought to himself, well, I've probably lost the race anyway. Maybe I'd better help this old man and do what's right and make him strong. I can't leave him all alone here. It's the right thing to do to take care of this old man. And so the young brave waded out into the water. But I forgot. He grabbed a long stick, right? And at the end of the stick, it was pointed. He made sure he got one that had a sort of a spear at the end of it, right? It was shaped that way. And then he wandered out into the water. He waded out there a few feet deep, and then he looked and he watched for fish. And he watched, and then he struck one of the fish with the spear that he had made, and he stuck the fish, and he got the fish, and he brought it out, and then he set it on the shore, and then he went back out there, and he looked, and he got another one, because of course he had been taught how to hunt, and so he knew how to do that. And he brought the second fish out of the water, and then he thought, well, I should cook these fish for the old man. And so he thought, how will I make a fire? Well, now he knew a certain way to make a fire, of course, rubbing sticks together and things. But then he thought, wait a minute, right on my hip, I have some hot coals. They're still hot because I'm only halfway around the lake. I'll lay that out, and I'll brush those coals onto the ground, and I'll add some twigs, and I'll make a fire. And he did that, and he stuck the fish on a smaller stick, and he held them over the fire, and he cooked the fish. And then he fed the old man, and he sat there making sure that the old man was feeling stronger for having eaten. And the old man thanked him so much, and he was getting stronger and stronger. And the young man said, "Are you sure you're okay now?" And the old man said, "Be on your way, young man. Thank you so much. You have been so kind to me. May you be blessed for all that you have done for me. And thank you." And the young man said, "Are you sure you're okay?" "Oh, I'll make it back to my village now. I'm all stronger and I feel better now, and I know that I can make it back. I'll be just fine. Go along your journey." And the young brave decided that he would, but not before scooping up those coals, putting them back in the pouch, and tying them to his waist. Because he thought, well, if I go back there to the village, which I'll probably won't even make it before the sun goes down, and if I show up without any coals at all, it'll be even more embarrassing. I've lost the race and I don't have any coals. No, that cannot be. So he scooped up those coals and he put them on his waist, and he went on his way. And he went as quickly as he could now because he had lost a lot of time. And he thought he didn't have any idea if he was going to beat the sun. So he really started sprinting more and more. And then he'd have to rest and sprint more and more, because now he was in a race with the sun, we like to say. And so off he went. And he went around and he went around and he went around and he went around and he was watching past the forested trees to make sure the sun hadn't gone down yet. And he ran and ran. And the sun was about to go down just when he made it back to that great big fire, right? And there was no one there. Obviously, the event was over. And the other brave had made it in, and they celebrated, and they went away from the edge of the shore. Nobody was there. Well, the young brave, made it there just as the sun was about to go down. And he was so tired that he was on his hands and knees not far from that big fire, the community fire, we might call it. And as he was there, he looked up and he saw a couple of people coming out from the trees, from the direction of the village. They were coming from the village and they were coming down to the shore. And then he looked over here and he saw a few more people coming. And then more people, and then more people. And pretty soon the whole village was there, gathered around this fire, and they said nothing to him. And he was wondering why they had come back to see him, even though he had lost the race. And sure enough, very soon after everyone got there, out stepped the chief. And the chief had a concerned look on his face. And he was walking a little more quickly than he normally did. And he walked up to where the brave was and he said, "Young man, take your pouch and open your pouch and brush the coals out and light a fire right now." And the young brave knew to respect his elders and especially the chief. And so he quickly did that. He laid it out. He thought, why am I doing this? I've lost the race anyway, and the sun's pretty much going down now. And the chief said, "Do it right now." And so he did. He brushed out the coals. He grabbed a few pine needles and twigs. He set them there and he made a fire. And then he said, "Oh, great chief, why are you asking me to do this? Haven't I lost the race?" The chief stood back, he turned to the rest of the village and he said, "I would like to introduce to all of you your new chief." And it was the second brave that he pointed at. "This is your new chief." This brave was now their new chief. And the young brave said, "I don't understand, O great chief. Why have I won the race? Didn't the other brave get here first?" And the chief said to him, "Yes, he did. But when he took his coals off of his hip and brushed them off to the ground and put twigs on them, he was not able to light a fire. For you see," the chief explained to the brave, "I knew from the start that there was no possible way for a brave to go all the way around this lake and keep his coals hot enough to start a new fire. It's just not possible. And I knew," he said, "that at least halfway around the lake, you would have to heat up your coals again, and in order to keep them hot enough by the time you got back so you could start a fire." And then the chief explained to this young brave and to the rest of the village, "For you see, I have a friend from another village, an old man just like me. And that old man I asked to be at the other side of the lake and to beg for help. And I knew that the young brave that helped him was the kind of man that should lead our village. A man who put others ahead of himself. A man who looked to respect those who are older than he is." And so that was the key. The trick to becoming the new chief, the old chief knew, was for the young brave to renew his coals, keep his coals hot. And he could only do that by stopping and putting other people first, right? And so that's what you and I can do in our lives. We can become successful, we can be useful, and we can make a difference if we put other people first. And when we put other people first, it's like lighting a fire under ourselves. We renew our own coals, and we keep ourselves strong and able to help, like a good fire can help heat things up, right? So make sure that you renew your coals from day to day by looking for ways to help other people who cross your path, okay? And that's what God wants us to do, is put others ahead of ourselves. All right, that's our lesson for today. Thank you for listening. Let's pray as we close. Lord in heaven, you are a great big God. You are our chief. You are in charge of all of us. You are our Heavenly Father, and you want only the best for us. But you understand us better than we do, and you know the end from the beginning. And you know what it'll take for us to make a difference in our lives. You know what it'll take for us to be happy, and also for us to get ahead in our lives. And so there are things you ask us to do that might not make much sense to us, but in the end are best for us and for everyone around us. Help us to remember to renew our coals by putting other people first. And we thank you and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for joining me, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.